Today, we're going to talk about traits.
Traits are physical attributes or patterns of behavior that are relatively stable across time and across situations. So, hair color is a really good example of a trait. Hair color is relatively consistent throughout our lifespan, right? Our hair does not change color from hour to hour, from day to day, from week to week, month to month, and year to year. Now, that's not to say that our hair color never changes. I was born with really bright blonde hair, and now my hair is much darker. As I get older, it will turn gray. So, across the lifespan, we see changes in hair color. Also, my hair changes color throughout the year, right? So in the winter it's darker, and in the summer when I'm out in the sun it gets a little bit lighter. So there's a little bit of fluctuation. That's not to say that when something's consistent it has to be the exact same all the time. We see little changes, but it is broadly consistent throughout across time and across situations. That's what we mean by a trait. We can contrast that with something like hunger. Hunger is not a trait. Hunger does change from day to day, from hour to hour, and literally from minute to minute, right? You can be starving 1 minute, and then 5 minutes later, you can be so full that you never want to move again. So hunger is much more, it changes much more quickly, and so that would not be considered a trait, whereas something like hair color is relatively stable, so it would be. We're not interested in physical traits. We're not talking about physical traits today. We're talking about personality traits. These are patterns of behavior, a consistent pattern of behavior where people tend to act the same way across time and across situations. An example of this is conscientiousness, and we'll talk more about what conscientiousness is, but you can just think about it as neatness. That we all know people that are really neat, and their house is really well put together, and their car is always clean, and their desk is very well organized, and everywhere they go they put things in order and they are organized. That's conscientiousness. It is a pattern of behavior that cuts across time and across situations. That's what we mean by personality traits. So why do we care about personality traits? Personality traits, the cool thing about them is that they allow us to predict the future. The point of a pattern is that you can give me the beginning of a pattern and I can tell you what the end of it is. That a pattern is something that recurs. So we can do this with personality traits as well. If I know how someone behaved in the past, if I know what these traits are, then I can predict what they will do in the future. And predicting the future is always a good thing. In this case specifically, we can use personality traits to predict who's going to be successful at what type of job, who's going to like what type of job. And if you're in a management or leadership position and you have to delegate tasks, understanding people's personalities is very useful for that. We're going to talk about two different models of personality traits today. We're going to talk about the MBTI, and I'll explain to you why the MBTI is absolutely awful. And then we'll talk about the Big Five, which is the most popular and well supported models of personality. And it's okay. It's not great. It's okay. The MBTI is awful, but it's very popular, and that's why we're talking about it today. This test has basically no usefulness or value, and the only reason that I spend class time talking about it is because so many students have taken it, so many students find value in it, which I will discuss. And so I want to talk about it to debunk the MBTI specifically, but also because the MBTI is really representative of a lot of problems that we see in different personality assessments or different personality models. It's like a role model of bad personality tests. Before we get into why the MBTI is so bad, let's talk about what it measures or purports to measure. The MBTI defines you along four different dimensions. The first dimension is how we get our energy, and there are introverts who get energy from being by themselves, and extroverts who get energy from being around other people. The next dimension is what type of information we prefer. There are people that are sensors, they're sensing, and so they prefer information from the outside world. They prefer things that they can touch and taste and smell and see. Intuition is when you prefer information from internal information, so your gut feeling, your reasoning, your logic. The next dimension is how we make decisions. Thinking is one way of making decisions, and that's people who prioritize the objective outcomes of a decision. And then there's feeling, and that is people that prioritize the emotional outcomes of a decision. And then finally, we have how we organize our world. There's judging, which is when you like a very structured, predictable, scheduled world. And there's perceiving, which is when you prefer flexibility and spontaneity in your day-to-day life. So there's 4 dimensions, and you can be on either side of each of these dimensions, and then you get a combination of letters that express that. So you might be like an ISTJ or an ESFP or whatever it is. And that is the idea of the MBTI, or the Myers-Briggs type inventory. So the MBTI is an awful, awful test, and I'll tell you why. The first reason that the MBTI is an awful test is because it is unreliable. There's a 50% chance that if you take the test again 6 months from now, then one of your categories will change. And we just talked about the fact that the whole point of traits, the definition of a trait, is it is consistent across time. So if your personality is changing every 6 months, then what you're measuring is probably not a trait. Think about this like your bathroom scale. If you get on your bathroom scale and it tells you weigh 100 pounds and you go, oh, that seems wrong. And so you get off and you step back on it and now it says you weigh 200 pounds. You're not going to believe that scale, right? You're getting such vastly different answers every time you take it that you have to call into question whether the results are actually meaningful at all. And this is the problem that we see with the MBTI, is that people, when they take it over and over again, they get vastly different results. One of the main reasons for this is because the MBTI describes traits as binary. You are either introverted or you are extroverted. There is no in between. There is no gray area. You have to fit into one of these boxes. And what happens is people will take the MBTI and they'll score slightly introverted, but the MBTI doesn't have a slightly introverted category, so you just get thrown in with all the other hardcore introverts. And then you take it again 6 months later, and you score slightly extroverted. But again, there's no slightly extroverted, so you just get tossed into the category with all the hardcore extroverts. And your score has changed very little. You may have gone from 49 to 51 on the introversion-extroversion scale, but the MBTI does not allow for gray areas. It has to put you into this big box of either introverted or extroverted, whereas most of us are not that extreme. And so it's putting these false categories on us, which a slight change in us over time can create a big change in these categories. So if a test is good, it can predict something meaningful. IQ tests predict how well you're going to do in school. They predict how well you perform at work. They even predict how long you are going to live. More intelligent people live longer than less intelligent people. Those are important, meaningful, useful outcomes. A good model, like the model of intelligence, can predict something meaningful. So what can the MBTI predict? Well, if you go to the MBTI website, they're going to tell you that it predicts things like what jobs you're going to be good at, what jobs you're going to be happy at, and who you're going to work well with. The MBTI has done research on this for over 40 years, and they find that their test that you have to buy and get scored from them, or one of their licensed facilitators, is really good at predicting what job you're going to like and how well you're going to be at it and who you're going to work well with. They are the only institution in the world that has found any support for that claim. There's been over 40 years of research on the MBTI within the field of psychology, looking at, hey, what does it predict? And the answer is a resounding nothing. Independent, intelligent, very thoughtful scientists have tested the claims of the MBTI that it predicts what job you're going to like, what job you're going to be good at, and who you're going to work well with, and they have found no evidence to support that. So at the end of the day, the MBTI is just snake oil. You're probably wondering, if the MBTI is so bad, so obviously bad, then why is it so popular? You may have taken the MBTI at work. You may have taken the MBTI within this MBA program. Why do people continue to use it if it is so obviously bad? There are a lot of reasons for this, but let's talk about one of the main ones. I just had you read this paragraph and ask you how well you think this describes you. So let's take a step back and talk about where this paragraph comes from. When I started teaching about the MBTI and what a bad test it was, I got a lot of negative pushback from students. Students who told me that maybe the MBTI was not accurate in general, but that it was really accurate for them, that it gave them a lot of self-insight, that it described them perfectly and who they work with perfectly. And they would not accept that the MBTI is not a valuable or useful test. And so I came up with a way to prove my point. And what I did was I told all my students that I was going to write a psychoanalytic summary of their personality based on the interactions that I had with them in class, and the work that they had turned in, their grades, everything else. I told them I was going to write up this little psychoanalysis of them and share it with them. And I told them, hey, these are really personal. Please don't share these with any of the other students in class. They're all really personal. And I asked them how accurate my description was. Now, as you can probably guess, I sent out the exact same description to every single person in class. And what kind of results did I get? These aren't actual results, but just a graphical display of what my results would look like basically every semester. I might get a couple students that were like, oh, this is really inaccurate, but the vast majority of students would rate that paragraph that you just read, that description, as either accurate or very accurate. And I would get emails sent back to me like, oh, wow, you're like a magical wizard who can read my soul. And in fact, that's why I had to quit doing that exercise, because when I told students that I had used the same one for everyone, when I told students that I had essentially tricked them, they got really upset. So I decided to quit doing that. I like to have a trusting classroom environment. I don't want you guys to feel like I'm trying to trick you. So what's going on here? Why do people believe that paragraph that I wrote, or I didn't write it, but why do people believe that paragraph that I used to send them? Why do people believe the MBTI when it is so obviously wrong? Again, there are a lot of reasons. We don't have time to go into all of them, but one of the big ones is something called the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect, named after P.T. Barnum, the guy that started the circus and had history working with fortune tellers and psychics and that type of thing. The Barnum effect is the idea that people are willing to believe vague, complimentary descriptions of themselves. So if you tell someone something vague and something nice, then they will believe it. And that's what's going on here with the paragraph that I sent out to students. The paragraph doesn't describe any one person. It describes what people are like in general. So the very first line of the paragraph is, you have a strong desire to be liked and admired. Yeah, that's not unique to you. That's part of being a human being. That's like saying, you have 2 arms and 2 legs and a head of hair. That's not true of everyone, but it's a pretty good guess. What else we got? Oh, at times you're extroverted, affable, and social, while at other times you're introverted, wary, and reserved. That is true of every person. Everyone likes to be alone and by themselves sometimes, and everyone likes to be social and hanging out sometimes. So the first way the Barnum effect works is to give people a vague description. The other thing about the Barnum effect is that people like to be complimented. So the paragraph that I sent out was mildly positive, right? So it says things like, well, you have some personality weaknesses, you are generally able to compensate for them. Oh yeah, you have some weaknesses, but don't worry, you're doing really well. And the one I love the most is you pride yourself as an independent thinker and do not accept others' statements without satisfactory proof, which is hilarious because, of course, this is a statement that you're accepting without satisfactory proof. But you read that and you're like, yeah, I am an independent thinker. That's a good point, paragraph. So the exact same thing that's going on with the Barnum effect, that paragraph that I showed you, is the exact same thing that's going on with the MBTI. Go back and read your MBTI and see how much of it is, first of all, positive and complimentary. How much of it is them buttering you up, number one. And then number two, how much of your description could apply to basically any human being in the world. That's how the MBTI works. That's how horoscopes work. That's how fortune tellers work. It's vague and complimentary. The reason I'm harping on this so much is because I just want you to be cautious because there are a lot of really bad tests out there. The Big Five inventory, which I give to my students, is freely available online. The questions and the scoring key, you can download them online for free. It is a very well supported, valid, reliable test of personality. If I am a consulting firm and I want to make money, I can't make money selling something that is already freely available. I have to come up with my own theory of personality, my own personality test, and I can copyright that and I can charge people to give them that test and to analyze it. And so this is why every single company has their own different personality test, is because they're making them up because they have to have something to charge. If they just use the ones that have been that have a lot of scientific evidence behind them that are freely available, it's harder to charge money for something that you can get for free. And you have to be really cautious about believing the results of these personality tests because once people put a label on you, or once you put a label on yourself, we tend to fulfill that label. My father always told me I wasn't very athletic. My dad's not very athletic, and so he always told me that I wasn't athletic. And not in like a mean or critical way. Just whenever I struggled with sports, he'd be like, oh, don't worry about it. You're a Kavanaugh, and Kavanaughs aren't athletic. And from a very young age. And so that's something I completely internalized about myself, and I never even tried to play sports. And when I played sports, I never really put effort into getting better at them because it just seemed like something that was out of reach. It didn't matter how much time and effort I put into it, I wouldn't get better. When I got older, I got into rock climbing, and I really enjoyed rock climbing just for the joy of it. I wasn't trying to get really good at it. But hey, as I put time and effort into it, guess what? I got better and better and better at it. And it wasn't that I was this completely unathletic person that was incapable of learning. It was that I believed I was incapable of learning, so I didn't even try. And I'm sure there is something in your life that someone has told you, or you've told yourself something, that you're not good at math, you're not good at writing, whatever it is, and you believe that, and because you believe it, you avoid those opportunities, those situations where you actually learn that skill. So you have to be very cautious of any test that's going to put a label on you. And also just beware of any test claiming to tell you who you are. We are so skeptical about feedback from other people, but we spend 20 minutes filling out a multiple choice test and we think it's like this deep insight into our soul, right? You are an incredibly complex person. The people who know you the best are you, your family, your coworkers. They're the ones who can give you deep insight into who you are. A 20-minute multiple choice test cannot reveal your soul to you. Lastly, be very skeptical of any personality test that puts you into a category, like the MBTI does, where the MBTI says you're either an introvert or an extrovert, or there's personality tests that assign you a color, right? You're like a blue, you're an orange, you're an owl, you're an eagle, you're a peony, you're an orchid, whatever it is. Human beings are incredibly complex. We cannot be simplified into categories in very easy ways. And so that's a red flag. And that's not to say that there aren't any good personality tests that put you into categories, but in general, that is a red flag of an indication that it probably isn't a very good personality test, or theory of personality. And that is why the MBTI is awful. All right, now let's talk about the Big Five. The Big Five's not great either, but it's much better than the MBTI. It is the cutting edge of personality research. So, the Big Five is the most well-supported theory of personality, and yeah, personality is hard. It's one of those things that intuitively we understand really easily. If I ask you what your personality, the personality of your coworkers are, you can give me a description of that pretty easily. And yet, scientifically, figuring out what personality is and measuring it has turned out to be really difficult. So we haven't had a lot of success at it, but the Big Five is the best we got, and it does okay. One of the big differences between the Big Five and the MBTI is that the Big Five does not put you into categories. The Big Five is not going to say you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's a spectrum, right? From introverted to extroverted. It'll say you are, 68 out of 100 on introversion or whatever it is. So, by avoiding those categories, there's a lot more nuance to your results on the Big Five. The Big Five are 5 personality traits that hypothetically you could use to describe anyone on the face of the earth. Just like if I wanted to describe any person physically, I might choose height, weight, eye color, hair color, that I could describe anyone on earth using those 4 dimensions, right? If we want to describe anyone's personality, we need these 5 factors. And the 5 factors are openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Go ahead and read the first letter of each of those words, and what do you get? Ocean. So that's how you can remember the Big Five. Ocean. That's why I have a wave icon for the Big Five. Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Ocean. Openness to experience is when you like trying new things. I got a dude skiing here. So adventure sports like skiing, skydiving, rock climbing, riding a motorcycle, those would be connected to openness to experience. But you don't have to be an adrenaline junkie to be high on openness to experience. It's just trying new things. So that can be trying new cuisines, that can be reading novels from all over the world, that can be traveling, going on hikes to new places. Whatever it is, it's just this craving and enjoyment of new experiences. A test you might give yourself to see if you're high on openness to experience or not is you got a quiet night in, you're going to watch a movie on Netflix. Are you going to watch that movie that you've already seen 10 times that you know you love? Or are you more tempted to try something new that may or may not be good? If you're the type of person that often rewatches movies because you know you're going to like them, you're probably lower on openness to experience. And if you're the type of person that never watches the same movie twice or is always eager to see the next thing, then you're probably high on openness to experience. Characters from popular media, Indiana Jones, Arya Stark, they're very high on openness to experience. They're always trying new things and getting new experiences. The next of the Big Five is conscientiousness, and conscientiousness is basically how goal-oriented you are. And it's also associated with how organized you are, how detail-oriented you are, but really conscientious people are goal-driven. They accomplish goals. They have goals and they accomplish them. So one of the first ways they assess personality was not through paper and pencil tests, but actually just by wandering around your house and judging you. And one way they used to identify how conscientious people were was by looking at their closet. And the highest conscientious people, or people high in conscientiousness, have all of their hangers facing the same direction and all of their clothes facing the same direction. And whenever I say that, half the class always goes, yeah, of course, how else would you organize your closet? And the other half of the class goes, wow, that sounds crazy. I would never even think of that. If your closet looks like this, you're probably high on conscientiousness. If your closet looks like mine, aka a pile of clothes on the floor, then you're probably low in conscientiousness. And now some of the disorder of this class makes more sense to you. From popular media, we have people high in conscientiousness like Leslie Knope. If you watch Parks and Recreation, she's very goal-driven, very organized, very detail-oriented. Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, or Lisa Simpson from The Simpsons. Next, we have introversion and extroversion. So you'll notice that this is the same as the MBTI. The introversion extroversion scale is the only scale on the MBTI that has any reliability and validity whatsoever. But still, because it has that problem of putting you into categories, it still sacrifices a lot of reliability. So the Big Five incorporates introversion and extroversion. People have the wrong idea of what introversion and extroversion is. They usually think of introverts as like Big Bang Theory, where people are like really nerdy, maybe smart, and don't know anything about social interactions, whereas extroverted people are like affable and charming and outgoing. That can be true, but that's not what introversion and extroversion are. Introversion and extroversion are about how do you recuperate and recover when you're feeling tired or when you're feeling stressed out. Introverts need alone time to recharge their batteries, and extroverts need to be around other people to recharge their batteries. So that has nothing to do with how charming you are. We all know people that are love to be around other people and aren't very good at it. And we all know people that are incredibly charming and they just like to be by themselves sometimes. So it's not about your social skills. It's just about where you get energy from. So I am I'm like moderately introverted, and my girlfriend's like moderately extroverted. And we'll say, like, she lives by the lake in Oakland, and so we'll go down to Lake Merritt and we'll meet up with friends and we'll like drink beer and play cornhole for a few hours, and then we'll come home and I'll be like, whew, all right, man, I need to relax a little bit. And she's like, what are you talking about? We just spent, the last 3 hours relaxing. Because for her, being around people like that is relaxing, whereas for me, it's emotionally taxing. And that doesn't mean that I don't have fun or that I don't enjoy it. I like my friends, I like being social, but it just takes effort for me. It drains energy from me in a way that it does less so for extroverts, whereas extroverts tend to get energy from social situations. Extroverted people from popular media, SpongeBob SquarePants, Tyrion Lannister. After a long day of marching, he loves rolling into the tavern and making friends, right? And Michael Scott. The next of the big five is agreeableness. Agreeable people go along to get along. An example of agreeableness is that, well, first of all, the opposite of agreeableness is being stubborn. So an example of this is you are hanging out with a couple friends and you guys are hungry and they all want burritos and you want sushi. How hard do you fight for sushi? If you're super high on agreeableness, you won't even bring it up. People low in agreeableness will make their viewpoint known and try to push everyone into doing what they want. And so that's agreeableness. Examples from popular media, Rob Lowe's character from Parks and Recreation was really high on agreeableness, whereas April Ludgate's character was, or the character April Ludgate, was very low on agreeableness. If you watch The Office, Angela is very low on agreeableness. And lastly, the last personality trait we have is neuroticism. Neurotic people are susceptible to negative emotions. People that are high in neuroticism tend to be more emotional and tend to have more negative emotions. So things like anxiety, depression, rage go along with neuroticism. The opposite of neuroticism is emotional stability. And so this is people that it is hard to upset them. And once they get upset, they return to baseline very quickly. So going back to talking about my girlfriend, who does not know she's being used as examples in my lectures, she is like the lowest person I have ever met on neuroticism. She is a second grade teacher in East Oakland public schools, so she has a stressful job. And she'll come home and she'll walk through the door and, she'll just look like downtrodden and like just so sad. And she'll sit on the couch and she'll like lean against my shoulder and she'll just like sob for like 5 minutes. And then it's like someone throws a switch. Like she'll just wipe the tears off her face, and all right, cool. What are we doing the rest of the night? And it is just, I cannot comprehend how emotionally stable that she is. That first of all, it's so difficult to get her to that level of stress. But then once she's there, she rebounds so quickly to her baseline of just kind of mellowness. So that would be an example of very someone very low in neuroticism. I'm a little higher than her in neuroticism. Okay, so popular or characters from popular media. Woody Allen is he is the archetype of neuroticism. The characters that he played and that he wrote for himself are just so neurotic that they go out of their way to find things to be upset or sad or angry or scared about. Right? Their life is always on the verge of catastrophe. That's the same thing with George Costanza. If you watch Seinfeld, and if you watch Archer, Cyril Figgis is very high in neuroticism as well. So those are the big five. Openness to experience. Do you like trying new things? Conscientiousness. Are you goal oriented and detail oriented? Extroversion. Do you get energy from being alone or with people? Agreeableness is do you go along to get along? And eroticism is whether someone is prone to negative emotions like being stressed out, being anxious, being depressed. The Big Five is reliable, so the Big Five stays relatively stable across the lifespan, measuring from a very young age to a very old age. In general, we all tend to become more conscientious and more agreeable as we get older. We call that maturity. So we do see, like just like with hair color, we do see changes in personality across the lifespan, but they're gradual. And the Big Five predicts important stuff. So, conscientiousness is a great predictor of job performance. For pretty much every job, it helps to be organized and goal oriented. Extroversion is great for predicting performance at jobs that involve people. So, if you're more extroverted, you're going to be a more effective leader or manager. You'll be more effective in customer relation roles. You'll be more effective in sales roles. So, and I can go on with the other five factors, but the Big Five actually predicts meaningful things. So it's not just reliable across the lifespan, it's actually useful for something. So these are the two things we learned today. The MBTI is awful, it is witchcraft, it is snake oil, don't buy into it. The Big Five is okay. It's the best we got. We'll probably have a better one within our lifetimes. Thank you for listening.